Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. As we're in the midst of another monsoon spell and we're looking at the kind of damage at this time as far as Punjab is concerned, we're looking at floods, we're looking at people grappling with the challenges. We want to speak about the kind of impact that we're going to be looking at as far as agriculture is concerned, and of course as far as economic overall in economic impact of these floods months from now. Of course long term and short term, we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the measures that can actually come into force now, and those that perhaps even should be taking place even as we speak. What we can do to counter the kind of damage that is going to take place, that seems to be the story at this time. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Asad Mahmood. He's NEECA climate and policy economist. Thank you for being with us. We have with us Dr. Usman Chohan, who's advisor on economy, CAS. Thank you for joining us today. We'll also be joined by other guests. We have with us Maryam Shabbir, who's an environmental expert. Thank you for being with us today. Dr. Usman, we've spoken about economy, we've spoken about, of course, the way, as far as economic impact of reforms is concerned, as far as broad-based taxation, all of that. In the face of all of those challenges that Pakistan has consistently been grappling with, and we felt over time that things have stabilized to an extent. These floods now, how do you see the picture now? Of course, it seems to be getting muddier, it seems to be getting perhaps more challenging even as we speak. How are you looking at things?
My worry is more for the coming months.
Okay.
My worry is that the damage that we are experiencing now will translate into economic outcomes more 3 months or 6 months down the road.
Okay.
There are 3 areas that I'm concerned about. The first is inflation, because we've done a very good job at controlling the rate of inflation.
Yeah.
Now, with food commodities being a very significant portion of the basket of the ordinary consumer, because the stock is being depleted, the next harvest is not going to be the same. Of course, 2 harvests down the road, the soil is more fertile, but that's too far out. In the more immediate term, you will see that cost of living issues will arise as foodstuffs will become more expensive. The second is for the employment and wage earning element. So about 50% of our labor force, not GDP, but just labor force, is involved in agriculture. And it's about 25% of GDP now, or 30-ish. Now, with that 50% that's involved in labor, if your crop is devastated, you have not as many hands to be able to help. Those who own the farms are different from those who work on the farms, and those who work on the farms will face acute struggles in being able to feed their family. They tend to have larger families also, so more mouths to feed. That sort of labor-related issue comes up. And the third is the reinvestment expenses. So we want to see our farms grow in terms of the capital stock. We want to see them have better machines, better stuff happening. But now a lot of costs are going to be put down just to be able to catch up to where we were prior to the floods. Okay. So we're in this vicious cycle.
So it takes us back, you're saying.
That's correct. That's correct.
To a large extent.
Yes.
Let me include Asad in this also. Asad, of course, let's talk about each of these issues that Usman has mentioned. Inflation. Is it true, and as a consumer, are you looking at perhaps things already becoming pricier as far as the markets are? And when we are, when we look at, for example, the crop situation, when we look at, of course, this is southern Punjab is affected, Sindh is, affected, even upper Punjab. So overall, how are you looking at that impacting things, in terms of inflation, in terms of price hike, all of those things, which has been, like I said, those are the challenges that Pakistan has been grappling with. So how do we counter this? Is it possible to counter it at all, in your opinion?
Well, we are quite a resilient nation, I can say. We need to be optimistic at this point in time, because we need to find out the ways, regardless of international community is going to facilitate us or not. So my viewpoint is like definitely the food insecurity is going to hit us hard, until and unless we change our diet patterns, in fact, or definitely the farmers may not be able to retain their economic cash flows, but at the same time we have to see the way out for those vulnerable farming communities, and especially the small landholder farmers in this context. So this is something like where they were earlier even not getting the conventional loans which were meant to be for the farmers because of like a lot of documentation to be worked out, collaterals. So now there are no collaterals even for them to be submitted in terms of livestock or any other thing. So everything has to, there is a hard reset. So this is something like, it's not only going to be food insecurity or inflation aspect, you're also going to see, like if you go towards imports of food commodities, it's also going to deplete your foreign reserve at the end of the day. So we need to look into like our adaptation plans and what are the policies speaking about, and come up with a long-term solution, because we have been trying and repeating like those again, reactive approaches, and don't get enough time every time to again like focus on.
I think it's very important that you're talking about reactive versus proactive, which is something we spoke about earlier. But you know, of course, the pattern, the weather pattern, the climate damage that we're looking at, I mean, to some extent we do know what's happening and what's going to happen. So you know, it's not that we're completely, you know, clueless, even if we don't know the extent of the damage. Let me include Maryam in this also. Maryam, can you hear me? Maryam, is it, you know, we're talking about reactive versus proactive approach. Are you looking at, I mean, do you think this could have been circumvented? The kind, okay, you know, to an extent we can talk about the extent of damage, but you know, the fact that it was going to come, the fact that it was going to happen was, of course, you know, to some extent we didn't know that, right?
Well, I will slightly disagree with that, and to some extent, I would agree as well. Agree in terms of receiving unusually more rains this year in Pakistan because monsoon arrived early and it's still going on and ideally should have been ended. So that was something which was forecasted, of course, but it was more than the capacity of our cities and our villages and the phenomena of cloud bursts. That was really unpredictable, especially cloud bursts, you know, because we don't have technology in Pakistan to really monitor that, you know, in localized areas, especially in mountainous areas. In terms of what was known and what could have been done is that we always, our institutions always focus on a response, and they are to some extent great at response, at least this year, because they were able to evacuate a lot of people in a lot of areas. But in terms of first two steps, which are really, really important for long-term planning, for example, mitigation and planning. I think that's where we need a lot of work, and that requires not only political will, but also a lot of resources. For example, investing in climate resilient infrastructure, then regularizing private housing societies who are like literally on this on the sides of Indus River, because that area was originally when Pakistan came into being, and even before that, that was belonged to farmers and they were like planting crops over there. But now we see that it has been replaced with private housing societies. And there are lots of laws which requires more resources for its implementation and improvement of governance. For example, controlling timber mafia, like 78% deforestation in Pakistan is because of timber mafia. And then there are like lots of things which are related to governance. Now, if I can bring your attention towards what's estimated loss right now is if we look at the population, you know, only in Punjab according to 2023 census, and if you look at how many areas are affected, you know, right now the number I quickly calculated when you started this program is around 43 million only in Punjab, and approximately 1.65 million in 15 districts of Sindh would be potentially affected. That means they have either lost their educational institute, their houses, their farms. It has like everything in between, and definitely there are lots of losses which are like non-economic losses. For example, many family members have lost their dear ones, and that is never incorporated when we submit this report to international communities. I think it's high time that we include the human side of it, you know, to international organization when we are asking for the funding, because mental health assessment is very, very important in these calamities. It's that requires resources to work
Maryam,
on.
I think you've raised some very, very relevant and apt points. Please stay with us. I have to go to Aamer Hayat Sab, and then I'll come back to you. He's part of the progressive. He's also a progressive farmer and climate activist. Aamer, can you hear me?
Yeah. No, I'm hearing you.
Aamer, we're talking about the impact of the floods at this time to the farmer, the way that it translates, the way that it's the cost of it that's going to, of course, invariably pass on to the farmers, whether the small scale ones, and of course those are the ones that we're really, going to be worried about. How do you see this? And what measures do you think that the government can take in terms of rebates, in terms of, giving, tax leeway, reducing them or doing away with them? What kind of measures do you think the government can take to perhaps facilitate that farmer that suffered, the farmer whose crops have suffered so much because of this?
Thank you very much for taking me on this very important issue today. I can tell you, these floods are not just numbers on paper. Water is standing in our fields. Crops are ruined, and our animals are under pressure, which is the livestock, and that's very important. And if you just look at the numbers, what the news and the media is telling us, that it's more than 60% of the rice is underwater, 40% of cotton, and around 35% of your maize. And this is not just about this number at the national economy level, but it's every household economy that has disturbed with this water, with this floods. You just recall the first quarter of this year, we were worried about drought, rains are not coming. And the last quarter started with a lot of rains and floods. So if you just think about a small or medium scale or large scale farmers that is underwater and being impacted by the floods, everything is flashed. They need everything now, not only to bear the losses of their previous crops, but to see what is going to be happen with them in the near future. If you're talking about the government, it's, I think, very premature to discuss that what are the losses, because we need to understand first that how much crops have been devastated and what type of measures should be taken for those impacted farmers in the rural communities. It's not only about...
You're saying, Aamer, that data is not available at this time. So you can't even calculate the losses and, to what level, the suffering, of course, and the extent of it.
Exactly, because the water is coming now. Once the water is going to recede, then we will be able to calculate how much loss the farmers are bearing and what at the national level. So we need to, I think, look into two types of measures immediately, the short term and the long term. First, we need to work on the short term measures, that how we are going to save the farmers, which I think the government is trying its best to save not only the people in the rural areas who are being impacted with the flood, but also the animals. Because animals are also, and I think the major part of the national GDP when you're talking about the agriculture GDP numbers. So first and foremost measure is to how to save those people and animals. Then we will see that how we are going to compensate them with their existing losses and for the future, because your next crop is very critical, like your food security is at risk. And this is not only, we should not only look into the government, it's the businesses. Businesses are actually the people who can invest in the adaptation and the climate resilience. So we need to work on that as well. But first we need to have right data that how much we need for our farming community and our agriculture sector.
But Aamer, do you also find that, when we talk about the private sector, and I think that's hitting the nail on the head when you say that, it's not just the government and we shouldn't only be looking at the government. And, of course, there's this avalanche of criticism that comes against, of course, and they are in the fields. They are, whether you talk about the Chief Minister Punjab, or you talk about what's happening in Sindh, or you talk about, if you talk about even on the federal level, you are looking at the government there. They are very much, grappling with whatever's happening. But whether the private community can step up how has your, do you think that, you know, the kind of response that we see generally, you know, we are also a resilient nation, but we're also quite hands-on with helping, and we know that, you know, from previous numerous examples. Do you see that kind of help coming forward, in your opinion, from the private sector? Do you feel that they will step up if you know, we have the right figures?
Well, I think the government can help to steer this discussion, because it's only the government that can invite all the stakeholders on the table. We don't need any, like you say, imdad. हमें अब imdad नहीं चाहिए. We need the critical measures. We need the whole business value chain to play their part. You know, once you are talking about, we have been saying for a long time that we are hit by the climate change. If you are talking about climate change, you have to have the adaptation measures. Well, adaptation does have a cost, and certainly farmers do not have that cost. But the businessmen, the businesses who are working in the agriculture value chain can play their role to pay that cost to make this whole agriculture sector adaptive against climate change and to make this nation resilient when we are talking about the agriculture community and the rural Pakistan. So they need to come up. They need to think about it. Like, your banks need to come up. You know, there is a policy at the state bank level that if you are getting an agriculture loan under 25 acres, that is by default insured. Now it's a time to take every financial institution, every business on board to help those communities who are being impacted or who have been impacted by this hard-hit impact of climate change and disaster.
I think that you've raised some very, very important points. Thank you so much for being with us. Aamer, Hayat Sahab, thank you for joining us. I'm going to take these to our guests here. I think Dr. Usman, what Aamer has raised are very pertinent questions, and I think that, you know, when he says and you know, we don't need that help or, you know, imdad or you know, that kind, we want those measures in place. How do that, in your opinion? He's saying that, you know, the government needs to ensure that that private sector is involved, that the banks are involved, and that value chain, I think the business value chain he's talking about. Are we insulated enough to be able to do so, in your opinion?
I think that this is the right mindset. Basically, we're talking about public value preservation. And there's many stakeholders in public value preservation. It's not just the government. It's not just the federal government. It also involves civil society. It also involves politicians, the private sector. Everybody has to get involved. And this mindset of not requiring assistance as imdad is very positive, because Pakistan does have the resources to grapple with all of its problems more than sufficiently. There is one other element to this, however, which is that this is not just a national issue, it is a regional crisis. And of course, climate change is global by nature, but everything that is south of the Himalayas is in jeopardy. You are seeing the videos coming from as far east as Uttarakhand and Madhya Pradesh.
Trans-border, as they say.
It's certainly trans-border, but the person on the other side of the border is not behaving rationally. You are seeing that the dams are the spillways are being let go at the wrong time. And the greatest damage of that, aside from obviously the civilian damage in India, is to East Punjab. It is a very bad situation, and I'm willing to say on TV that there is a irreconcilable gap between the Sikhs and the Hindus in Haryana and East Punjab. Like, it is that irreconcilable now. First of all, this Sindoor war had a very strong impact on the Sikhs, galvanizing their desire and aspirations for a Khalistan, but also that they see this bad faith acting by the union government and how it is actually jeopardizing many holy Sikh sites in Pakistan and settlements of Sikhs in India. I mean, the Kartarpur thing is very close to the river, and you saw that it was. This is kind of profaning of a holy site from the Sikh perspective. It's only at the second tier of that building, that holy building, that holy site, that they were able to manage and protect things. So the Sikhs are seeing this as a very nasty move by India, and because, as you use the exact term, trans-boundary, Pakistan and India should be working together. But what happened this year? The Indian government held the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance. There is no such thing in that contract, and the World Bank ruled in Pakistan's favor. So if this is the mindset in which regional problems are going to be held, then everyone's going to drown, I'm going to tell you right now.
But we also had the SCO, and you know, one hopes, of course, like you said, we haven't seen that happen, but one hopes that there will be, you know, perhaps more rationality from across the border. Because of course we are looking at China, we are looking at, you know, that the SCO summit and prioritizing that kind of regional cooperation, and you can't have regional cooperation with a partner like India unless it does away with, like you said, these kind of draconian one-sided measures or one-sided decisions that it chooses to take.
Yes, you're right, and I'd like to add one thing in that, which is that the SCO begins with the doctrine of common security as a positive sum game. So your security is my security, which does away with the previous colonial system of my security means your insecurity. Well, India is very much steeped in that I need to make sure you're insecure. And that's, so it's not a legitimate member of the SCO because it doesn't share those values. It thinks that making Pakistan a little bit less secure will make it a little bit more secure, and it doesn't work like that. In fact, because I'm mentioning the Sikh element to this, it's making India a lot less secure. Northern India is a lot less secure.
Let me also include Asad in this. Asad, how do you think we go there? You know, how do you think we channelize it? You know, of course, one thing that Aamer mentioned is that the data is still not available. You know, we know what's happening. If we look at Gujarat, or you know, at this time, the visuals are quite, the situation doesn't seem really great. And you know, of course, we know that the flood, we know that the waters are receding, but it's also going towards the south. And so overall, you know, that data has to, when that data comes, only then we'll be able to channelize this.
Well, that's a sort of reality as well, but we have the agriculture census by Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, and it was done a year ago, and definitely things might have changed a lot, but such statistics or numbers in today's world could be kept realistic, live, due to different satellite imageries and things like that.
So you're saying it's possible to sort of, you know, have an estimate?
There is one tool which has been developed by National Disaster Risk Management Fund, and it has certain layers that you can ascertain the loss. They have simulated the layers of crops covers, they have simulated the layers of critical infrastructures, and then they have also added some costing to it. If this incident occurs, then what it is going to be costing to the government, but definitely it doesn't account for, as Maryam just mentioned, that it is not going to account for all the losses. And another interpretation which we do every year and across the headlines, that we are just recurring loss of 2 GDP, 2% GDP. So that is something also we are not accounting for, the compounding effect that it is bringing in every year. So that mathematical equation also has to be like little more explicitly defined, and that the adaptive capacity of the community at large, or the people who are suffering, or the front bearers, they also have to be looked into. Right now, as Mr. Bhandara has mentioned about adaptation measures, State Bank, definitely the ECC have also asked the SBP to come up with that crop risk insurance policy, facilitating the small landholders.
But Aamer, has this ever been done before? You know, we are looking at, I mean, what I find really, at least for me, arresting is the fact that, you know, if you're not looking at that kind of help or imdad, or, you know, if you're looking at measures to come from the private sector which are fielded through, you know, facilitated by the government, has it been done before? Is there a precedent for it?
Well, there have been, you can say, non-synergized efforts. There have been success stories when we talk about on-farm water management practices or high efficiency irrigation practices. You have climate resilient seedings, and there are different R&D. You have top most well-known agriculture universities bringing up with their researches and hybrid seeds and things like that. But it is all what we have to do is we have to sum it up for the small scale farmers, small landholders specifically. So this is something, one of the aspect which SBP they have just started one of the activity in which I'm also leading that intervention to facilitate to develop in fact the climate smart agriculture practices, focusing on the small scale small landholder farmers in fact. So this is something where we need to see, we have to we have to sensitize them. But the common thing which every farmer says mostly is to is for them is seeing is believing. They don't have enough resources at the back end which they can invest and do the experiment. So for them, they have whatsoever has to be done by them, it should be displayed through pilot projects, through model different models. So only that because of that they would be comfortable enough to apply those best practices in the field, and that is something which we are SBP is also like cognizant of this fact and trying to come up with that sort of measures, educating the small landholder farmers, and similarly in parallel like the banking institutes as well.
Let me include Maryam in this. Maryam, we're looking at these kind of measures that may come like, that to facilitate what's happening. But in terms of data, what is your opinion on this, that there is at this time we should be able to get estimates of what the likely damages are going to be, and perhaps move towards this kind of the kind of measures that can facilitate the farmer, that can have a broad based impact, and of course the business value chain, which can then help the farmer. If we look at prices, or we look at adjustable perhaps leeways, or we also look at the private businesses facilitating, for example, if we look at rice or sugar, the main crops, wheat, all of those.
Yeah, I think you see, if we look at how agriculture is contributing to Pakistan GDP, I think the 23% which it does contribute towards it is already at risk, and I think that's a huge loss moving towards food insecurity in Pakistan and inflation, like your other experts also mentioned. As far as the debate on data is concerned, I really have an objection how our institutes, and even at international level, that's why our institutes gather this data, because the UN and such organizations, they really rely on big numbers and stuff like that, but they always miss the ground realities and the kind of trauma and pain people go through. You cannot give them numbers, that this much amount of pain a person went through because that person lost 24 family members in his family, and one person was here for his wedding and lost his house and mother and sisters and everyone. So we need to include non-economic losses as well, as far as the exact data is concerned, because that's how unfortunately the world works when it comes to giving us compensation. As I told you, right now in Punjab, if I look at the districts like Narwal, Sialkot, Kasur, Lahore, Okana, Faisalabad and Sargodha, we know that these are being impacted due to flooding in Pakistan, be it riverine from India, rain, or glacier melting. That number gives us 8 districts in urban areas, 8 districts in rural areas. Approximately 43 million people have been impacted. Now, exact losses, how many are being impacted in terms of losing their homes, how many impacted in terms of losing their cropland, how many that of course requires work. But always during these crises and losses, there's always a few people left behind. For example, there are geographically difficult areas as well, which people can't reach out over there, and those people are always missed. So I think moving forward to cater this need of data, we need to bring citizen science into practice, in which we can train local people, because they are the first responders, when it comes to these disasters, because there are very difficult areas in terms of climate change and disasters where our institutions cannot reach, and when they try to reach, their helicopter was also crashed because of climatic conditions over there. So I think if we train local communities over there, build a kind of dashboard and system where they can inform our authorities through satellite phones, because even cellular network doesn't even work, and provide them satellite phones.
Necessitate a lot of training on the local level, right? And we've also spoken about this before, that there have to be parallel systems locally where there is district administration dealing with these crises, but then perhaps parallel systems need to be developed on a local level, whether they can be in the form of authorities, or whether they can be in the local community can play its role, and that has to be devised. I think that there's no time now, but it has to be done as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to quickly comment on the role of private sector. I think we have seen that whenever private sector was involved without having a proper framework, that has caused more damage than any good in Pakistan or globally, if you see, we involved, there was this conversation for years that we need to involve private sector at conference of parties negotiations. And we have seen that because those guys have big money and they have literally taken over the negotiations, and every year negotiations are not that much successful, so we need to be very, very careful when we talk about involving private sector and taking them on board. Yes, they have a lot of money. Yes, we need to have conversation with them, but we need to develop a framework and guidelines that how much we want to involve them. We don't want them to take over all these things, because that is going to cause more damage. The private housing societies is also like a kind of private sector. Look what they have done to us. Private housing societies has like private businesses have like established like big businesses in Pakistan, and they are not practicing this CSR, which is corporate social responsibility. As for law, they are like liable to do some green work under CSR, and they have fund, and our institutions and government need to tap on those funds because they are responsible to contribute towards it. So what I want to say is that we need to be very, very careful when we talk about like involving private sector and taking them on board.
There has to be a solid framework within which then the private sector can respond. I understand. Thank you so much, Maryam. Thank you for your very valuable input. Thank you for joining us. Usman, I think raises a very important point. I want to sort of, get clarification on this from you, because we are, this involvement, what kind of framework do you think can there be, under which the private sector can then, respond? Because she's right, there have to be guidelines, there have to be a formula. Otherwise, there will be these issues which she's mentioned.
It's a very good point that was made about the fact that private sector, when it runs amok, is actually much worse for the environment. I mean, what do you think started this climate crisis to begin with? And the frameworks that they're speaking of is that private sector has specific contributions in targeted areas to achieve precise outcomes. When you have those sorts of frameworks put into place, then you're much likelier to get the outcomes you want, as opposed to just kind of nudging the private sector to do what it wants, because there's two things there. One, they might seek a marketing outcome from it, that look, we're doing so much, which is what's called greenwashing. So we're doing all this for the environment, becomes a marketing slogan rather than actually helping out the people that are in dire straits. And the second thing is they may try to capitalize for private interest rather than public interest. So what was cited was the private housing on a riverbed. I mean, does that make sense to any of us, that you bring the private housing societies on riverbeds? It doesn't make sense to start with. And the other point there that was very important was that there's been a hijacking of the COP summit. So you build this international platform for everybody to come and share their views, and it's been totally hijacked by big business, particularly big oil. They come and they pay delegates, or they have their interests and lobbies manipulated, so that what you get is such a watered down agreement by the end that it's not going to solve the world's problems. So letting the wrong people in the room, or having the right people...
It's going to have a counter effect to what, is... let me go to Asad on this. Asad, there's also corporate social responsibility that she's mentioned is, of course, part of has to be part of private businesses. How much of it, in your opinion, is actually happening? I believe that it is now part of the governments. We saw even in the new budget, there was, there's a lot more seriousness attached to it now. Do you think that it's relatively being practiced more? Do you think there's a seriousness to it? Do you think that it is one of those things that is not a whitewash anymore?
Yeah, like the new buzzword which is just like coming up is the ESG practices in context of when we talk about CSR. So like many listed companies are definitely looking into it, just like again OGDCL just got their green certified building and things like that. So that in the hospitals, mother care centers. So this is something which could be replicated. There are certain best practices which could be replicated across Pakistan by certain private counterparts. Again, the need of the hour is to get the policy. So here comes the point that when it's the right time to hit. So right now the government is pushing towards like coming up with a comprehensive climate resilience plan within 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
that is something, there are so many plans again, but the plans have to be implemented in true letter and spirit. And these things, what is the need of the hour basically, they
This
have
climate resilience plan that you're talking about, it is for private businesses.
it is what government is asked the relevant government counterparts to come up with. So this has to be make part and parcel of that comprehensive plan. Again, it should not be developed in such a haste that you miss many important components and overlook the real things. So right people for the right job should be there. There are many people when such requirements come up, such so-called experts pop out, give their non-practical sort of advices, and at the end of the day saying you get the old wine in the new bottle, and again the document or plan rests in the shelves and nothing from that is applied on the shop floor level. So again, if everything is being done in haste, so there are sectoral experts, there are international experts, and if this COP is coming up, so we need to see which people are in fact presenting Pakistan to really fight their case. Is this really the victims representatives or just like academic representatives, or so those who are hit hard, they can present themselves in a much better way to fight their case over there. And then the point is like, it's just like seeking climate finance in such a way that you're asking the developed countries in fact that for the problems which they have created. I correlated with an example that if your neighbor kid is playing cricket and he just hits a sixer and cracks your window, and ultimately if you ask the kid to behave gently next time, the owner or his parents come and teach you that why you haven't put on your climate resilient windows and things like that. So that's the big elephant in the room which we're talking about, which is also in the COPs most of the time, and we get deviated very
But where do
easily.
we go then, Dr. Usman? I think I find everybody is just raising really important points, and I think Asad also it's really important what he says, and the example also sort of explains it well. But the question is then where do we go? The countries like us, who are third world countries, who are at the mercy of these huge economies, and we also know, by the way, and that there's a shift in prioritizing. For example, of course, under the Trump administration,
Yes.
we know where the priorities are, and it's not on climate damage or climate resilience. So where do we go then? So what is the option for us?
There's some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that there are far larger forces operating against us. The fact is that Pakistan as a population is a miracle.
Yeah.
It's a miracle because east of us it's desert, and west of us all the way till the Atlantic Ocean is desert, and yet because of this miracle of the Indus River, we have so many people, so much civilization. It's really a miracle, but this miracle is fragile because it depended on a certain trajectory of a certain river coming out of the Himalayas. So we are very fragile. That's the bad news, that there are big forces working against us, and as the temperature is rising, the Indian Ocean is heating up faster and faster. That means the monsoons happen at erratic times and far larger as they hit, plus glacier melt is coming down and we can't all hold it back. That's the bigger forces. The good news is that there are some countries that have incorporated this deeply, and they have the resources and the muscle, so what we feared would be an even worse situation is not as bad. So for example, China is the leader in solar energy and electric vehicles and wind power and everything. Like, if you have a country that has the muscle and is making that impact, then the future might not be as bad as we thought. Now, even if we don't have that kind of muscle, if you have the right people and the right institutions, the right policies, and we're all working towards public value preservation, climate change is a natural corollary of that in terms of mitigation and adaptation. Like, it should be a natural part of that. So we should be doing the things that we would have done to reform our society in the absence of climate change. Just keep doing those, and climate change is a necessary corollary of a sustainable, equitable, and peaceful, harmonious society in Pakistan.
Right. On that note, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Usman Chohan. Thank you for your time. Asad, Mahmood, thank you for being with us today. Maryam Shabbir, thank you for joining us. Aamer, Hayat, thank you for being with us today. Of course, I think one of the really important points today when we spoke was about the role that the private sector can play in the kind of damage, in the kind of disaster we are looking at, and whether that can be done through a business value chain, which is what we spoke about, rather than in an unregulated or or purely organic manner. And if that can actually help those farmers, if those measures can actually help those small or large scale farmers that are suffering, and those people that continue to suffer as a result of this disaster that we are watching, if we can focus on that, if we can build on that, and if that can actually translate into tangible gains for those that suffer, and unfortunately it is the lower strata of society that find itself most vulnerable to this kind of climate damage. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.